Father Brown. Father Brown is a fictional Roman Catholic priest and amateur detective who is featured in 53 short stories published between 1910 and 1936 written by English novelist G.K. Chesterton. Father Brown solves mysteries and crimes using his intuition and keen understanding of human nature. Chesterton loosely based him on the Rt Rev. Msgr. John O'Connor 1870–1952, a parish priest in Bradford, who was involved in Chesterton's conversion to Catholicism in 1922. Character. Chesterton describes Father Brown as a short, stumpy Roman Catholic priest with shapeless clothes, a large umbrella, and an uncanny insight into human evil. In The Head of Caesar, he is formerly priest of Cobhole in Essex and now working in London. The character's first name is almost never referred to, but in the story The Eye of Apollo, he is described as Reverend J. Brown, while in The Sign of the Broken Sword, he is apparently named Paul. Father Brown makes his first appearance in the story The Blue Cross, published in 1910, and continues to appear throughout 50 short stories in 5 volumes, with 2 more stories discovered and published posthumously, often assisted in his crime-solving by the reformed criminal M. Hercule Flambeau. Father Brown also appears in a 3rd story, making a total of 53 that did not appear in the 5 volumes published in Chesterton's lifetime, The Donnington Affair, which has a curious history. In the October 1914 issue of an obscure magazine, the Premier Sir Max Pemberton published the first part of the story, then invited a number of detective story writers, including Chesterton, to use their talents to solve the mystery of the murder described. Chesterton and Father Brown's solution followed in the November issue. The story was first reprinted in the Chesterton Review, 1981, pp. 135, in the book 13 Detectives. Unlike the better-known fictional detective Sherlock Holmes, Father Brown's methods tend to be intuitive rather than deductive. He explains his method in The Secret of Father Brown. You see, I had murdered them all myself. Brown's abilities are also considerably shaped by his experience as a priest and confessor. In The Blue Cross, when asked by Flambeau, who has been masquerading as a priest, how he knew of all sorts of criminal horrors, Father Brown responds, "Has it never struck you that a man who does next to nothing but hear men's real sins is not likely to be wholly unaware of human evil?" He also states how he knew Flambeau was not really a priest. "You attacked reason. It's bad theology." The stories normally contain a rational explanation of who the murderer was and how Brown worked it out. He always emphasizes rationality. Some stories, such as The Miracle of Moon Crescent, The Oracle of the Dog, The Blast of the Book, and The Dagger with Wings, poke fun at initially skeptical characters, who become convinced of a supernatural explanation for some strange occurrence, but Father Brown easily sees the perfectly ordinary, natural. In fact, he seems to represent an ideal of a devout but considerably educated and civilized clergyman that can be traced to the influence of Roman Catholic thought on Chesterton. Father Brown is characteristically humble and is usually rather quiet, except to say something profound. Although he tends to handle crimes with a steady, realistic approach, he believes in the supernatural as the greatest reason of all. Many of the Father Brown stories were produced for financial reasons and at great speed. Chesterton wrote in 1920 that "I think it only fair to confess that I have myself written some of the worst mystery stories in the world." At the time he wrote this, Chesterton had given up writing Father Brown stories, though he would later return to them. Chester wrote 25 Father Brown stories between 1910 and 1914, then another 18 from interpretations. Father Brown was a vehicle for conveying Chesterton's view of the world and of all of his characters, is perhaps closest to Chesterton's own point of view, or at least the effect of his point of view. Father Brown solves his crimes through a strict reasoning process more concerned with spiritual and philosophic truths than with scientific details, making him an almost equal counterbalance with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, whose stories Chesterton read. However, the Father Brown series commenced before Chesterton's own conversion to Roman Catholicism. In his letters from prison, the Italian Marxist theorist Antonio Gramsci made this partisan declaration of his preference. Father Brown is a Catholic who pokes fun at the mechanical thought processes of the Protestants, and the book is basically an apologia of the Roman Church as against the Anglican Church. Church, 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 church. Sherlock Holmes is the Protestant detective who finds the end of the criminal skein by starting from the outside, relying on science, on experimental method, on induction. Father Brown is the Catholic priest who, through the refined psychological experiences offered by confession and by the persistent activity of the Father's moral casuistry, though not neglecting science and experimentation, but relying especially on deduction and introspection, totally defeats Sherlock Holmes, makes him look like a pretentious little boy. Moreover, Chesterton is a great artist, while Conan Doyle was a mediocre writer, even though he was knighted for literary merit. Thus in Chesterton there is a stylistic gap between the content, the detective story plot, and the form, and therefore a subtle irony with regard to the subject being dealt with. After Chesterton, as with Sherlock Holmes, Lord Peter Wimsey, and Nero Wolfe, tales featuring Chesterton's priest detective continue to be created even after the original author's death. John Peterson has written a further 44 mysteries solved by Father Brown. In the Italian novel Il Destino di Padre Brown, Father Brown's Destiny, by Paolo Giulisano, the priest detective is elected pope after Pius Roman XI with the pontifical name of Innocent Roman XIV. In other media, film, Walter Connolly starred as the title character in the 1934 film Father Brown, Detective, based on the Blue Cross. Connolly would later be cast as another famous fictional detective, Nero Wolfe, in the 1937 film The League of Frightened Men, and played Charlie Chan on NBC Radio from 1932. The 1954 film Father Brown released in the U.S. as the detective featured Alec Guinness as Father Brown. Like the 1934 film starring Connolly, it was based on the Blue Cross. An experience while playing the character reportedly prompted Guinness's own conversion to Roman Catholicism. Heinz Rühmann played Father Brown in two German adaptations of Chesterton's stories, Das Schwarze Schaf, the Black Sheep, 1960, and Er kann's nicht lassen, He Can't Stop Doing It, 1962, with both music scores written by German composer Martin Bacher. In these films, Brown is an Irish priest. The actor later appeared in Opere Zioni San Pietro, also starring Edward G. Robinson, 1967, as Cardinal Brown, but the film is not based on any Chesterton story. Radio, a Mutual Broadcasting System radio series, The Adventures of Father Brown, 1945, featured Carl Swenson as Father Brown, Bill Griffiths as Flambeau, and Gretchen Douglas as Nora, the rectory housekeeper. In 1974, to celebrate the centenary of Chesterton's birth, 5 Father Brown stories starring Leslie French as Father Brown and Willie Rushton as Chesterton were broadcast on BBC Radio 4. BBC Radio 4 produced a series of Father Brown stories from 1984 to 1986, starring Andrew Sachs as Father Brown. A series of 16 Chesterton stories was produced by the Colonial Radio Theatre in Boston, Massachusetts. Actor and voiceover artist J.T. Turner played Father Brown. All scripts were written by British radio dramatist M.J. Eliot. Imagination Theatre added this series to their rotation with the broadcast of The Hammer of God on 5 May 2013. Television. Manga. Father Brown was highlighted in Volume 13 of the Case Closed, Manga's edition of Gosho Aoyama's Mystery Library, a section of the graphic novels where the author introduces a different detective or occasionally a villain from mystery literature, television, or other media. Audiobooks. Ignatius Press published the audiobook version of The Innocence of Father Brown in 2008. The book is read by actor and theater of the Word Inc. founder Kevin O'Brien and features introductions to each story written and read by Dale Ahlquist, president of the American Chesterton Society. The book was a winner of the 2009 Forward Audiobook Awards. Other references: in Evelyn Waugh's Brideshead Revisited, a quote from The Queer Feet is an important element of the structure and theme of the book. Father Brown speaks this line after catching a criminal, hearing his confession and letting him go. "I caught him," with an unseen hook and an invisible line which is long enough to let him wander to the ends of the world, and still to bring him back with a twitch upon the thread. Book 3 of Brideshead Revisited is called A Twitch Upon the Thread, and the quotation acts as a metaphor for the operation of grace in the characters' lives. They are free to wander the world according to their free will until they are ready and receptive to God's grace, at which point he acts in their lives and effects a conversion. In the miniseries made by Granada Television, adapting Brideshead, the character Lady Marchmain Claire Bloom reads this passage aloud. In the mobile game Fate/Grand Order, in an effort to thwart James Moriarty after his own defeat of Sherlock Holmes, the characters summon up a number of phantom spirits of fictional detectives that were inspired by or followed after Holmes. The first to appear is a shadowy spirit described simply as round-faced priest, with the outline and vague features closely resembling the appearance of Father Brown in the Case Closed appearance. Compilation books. Most collections purporting to be the complete Father Brown reprint the 5 compilations, but omit one or more of the uncollected stories. Penguin Classics 2012 edition, ISBN 9780141,193,854, is the only truly complete one, including The Donnington Affair, The Vampire of the Village, and The Mask of Medes. The collected works of G.K. Chesterton, vols. 12 and 13, reprint all the stories including the 3 not included in the 5 collections published during Chesterton's lifetime.